Good afternoon. My name is Terrence with Empowering Foundations, and what we'll be discussing today is going to be the first step in learning to be a great manager, which we call, or key have token, management essentials. Okay, so what we'll be covering today is going to be it's six different categories of information, or topics rather, six topics of information that we'll be discussing today. The first one is going to be actions inappropriate for managers when in the presence of your subordinates. We will also be discussing adjustments necessary when becoming promoted within an organization, escaping the idea of managing like family, dating in the workplace, limiting a manager's role to simply being a manager, and accepting the responsibility of counseling your employees. Okay, so the quote that we pull, we're big on quotes at Empowering Foundations because we want to inspire you. We want to leave you with a feeling of change, a feeling of comfort in change. And so that's why as you go through all the blocks of our training, you will see quotes. Say, so management of your quote of the week for management essentials is going to be before we can start managing ourselves and others, we must first stop doing what doesn't work. Okay, that's by Spencer John. And what Spencer is saying is he's basically challenging us to think outside of our comfort zone. He's forcing us to take a step out of what we normally do in order to see the bigger picture of what we need to be doing. And that's going to be very important as we push through this phase of training. This is going to be a very challenging block of information because a lot of these things we're not comfortable with. Talking about dating in the workplace. Some of these things are just things that, as you grow into management, or maybe that if you've been in management a while, there are topics that come up that we must acknowledge. And by acknowledging those topics, we make ourselves available for ourselves to be better leaders. Okay. If you go down to the next slide there, what does the boss not buddy concept mean? What does this concept mean? This is a phrase used in order to officiate the difference between the role of a manager and the idea that the manager is able to be friends with those that he or she leads. Okay, so when you think of the boss not buddy concept, you have to start identifying with the fact that there's a change. You're about to go through a change. As a leader, now have either taking a new role into management, or whether it's the fact that you are already a member of management and now elevating yourself higher into management, we have to start identifying and analyzing the types of relationships that we have with people. That's going to be very important for you to do throughout the duration of your entire career. And it definitely has to start once you commit yourself to being a manager. We have to start looking at those relationships. So this concept is just merely forcing us to do that. Boss, not buddy. So if you think about what it's telling you, it is saying exactly what the words that we read at first, which is, as a manager, are your coworkers able to be your friends? And different people will argue different topics. For us at Empowering Foundations, we're going to say no. Bosses need to learn to be bosses first. You have to start managing your relationships. It's really not based on the fact of whether or not you can be a friend with a coworker. It's whether or not you can manage the relationships, the differentiating factors in the relationship that make you vulnerable as a leader. That's what we want to kind of discuss and expose you to as a manager. This block of training was built to help managers differentiate between the various roles that a manager may place in the workplace with subordinates in order to identify positive and negative patterns within their managerial style. As a young manager, you are left to be very vulnerable because you're growing. And if you've worked with managers before that maybe you've known that have grown into a company and grown up the ladder, there's a lot of speculation that happens with that change and transition. And what we want to try to do, we can't protect you from it, but we want to just acknowledge it. And we want to give you exposure to the changes that you're sure to exhibit once you take on that role. So move on to the next slide. Actions inappropriate for managers when in the presence of their subordinates. So this feeds into the boss not buddy concept. Okay. Rule number 1. There will never be a time when a manager is with a subordinate and it is entirely social. So what we're saying here is if you are the type of employee that parties with friends and that's just very social. I am that kind of employee. It's not about being a manager or a subordinate. It's just who are you? And I'm social. So I do tend to have friends that I want to go out with and that I want to hang with and, in and out of work, right? Because who knows you better the struggles that you're going through on a day-to-day than people that you work with. So that remains to be true. However, in doing so, we have to remember that there will never be a time when a manager is with a subordinate and it is entirely social. So even when you're, what does that mean, Terrence? When you're out and about with your subordinates, even as a subordinate, even as a friend, if you have that kind of friendship, or maybe you had it before and you're trying to understand how to manage that, the different variables between that friendship now because you're responsible for them in the workplace. You have to maintain a managerial image. It's not a presence that you have to maintain. You can let your hair down after work. But if you are in a place, for example, is it okay for your friend to have to call a cab for you and make sure that you got home safe? As a friend, yeah. But if you're my manager, no. Because the fact is that whatever it is that you do socially outside of work or when you're on lunch at work, those things travel back with the subordinate and they're going to judge you for that. They're going to have an opinion formed for how they feel about you based on your actions. And just because you punch out of a time clock, that doesn't mean that they're not still judging you in that way. You're their leader. So if they can't trust and know that the person that you are when you're at work is the same person that they can expect you to be all the time, then you become inconsistent. And it's the consistency as their leader that they're looking for. And you're responsible to give that to them. Rule number 2, treat your employees the same way as you would one of your customers or clients. We have to do this. You got to remember, just because someone works for you doesn't mean that that relationship is less valuable than someone else that you have an expectation from, to do business. You're also doing business with your employees, and they're holding you to the same expectation that you feel that the customers and clients are holding everyone to. That's very important to know, and you have to honor and manage that relationship as such. Your employees are just as important as the people that buy product from you, as people that might send in a review about you, to your boss. They're just as important. You have to remember to manage all working relationships the same, not to exclude those that work for you, your subordinates. They have an expectation of you just like the customer does, and just like, all of your, if you have customers or clients, whichever one you have, everyone has an expectation of you. Senior management has an expectation of you that you do honor and that you have to respond to. The customers also have that expectation that you honor and have to respond to. Likewise, subordinates, although they're not the ones that usually give you feedback or that are available in that way, doesn't mean that you can just move forward without honoring the relationship the same as you do with anyone else that you come in contact with in the professional environment. They're just as important. And they're even more sensitive toward you because they have a higher personal expectation from you based on what their needs are. They're looking for you to personally deliver something to them, their work-life balance, being able to motivate them and drive them and help them to develop a more sound career, a more stable career, and even enhance themselves as a professional to move up in their careers. they have a very high expectation on you and what you need to deliver to them. So just because you're constantly critiquing them, whereas they might not be critiquing you, doesn't mean that you can devalue that particular relationship or make it less important than other relationships that you come in contact with, that you have less control over, or you feel that you have less control over. Moving to the next slide. Adjustments necessary when being promoted within an organization. So anytime you are promoted at an organization, changes are sure to come. Changes are definitely going to come. There's no way to work around those changes. We have to learn to embrace those changes. And so let's just get right into it. Number one, you need to start off slow. Once you get promoted or into management, or once you come into a new establishment and you're a member of management, all eyes are going to be on you. And because all eyes are on you, you have to make sure that you're sensitive toward the role that you're now taking on, because that role comes with an expectation of everyone that's involved or around that role. And also you want to make sure that you're received in a way that is going to be positive, because you want to make yourself available for positivity for your team and for yourself. You want to feel good at work too. You are important as well. And so you want to just start off slow with all things that you do. No one wants a new incoming abrasive manager, and no one wants the guy that they're normally able to be more social with to just decide, to just cut them off and start on this new role and relationship with them. It's uncomfortable, and really it's unnecessary for you to pull out in that way. Okay, so the right way to do it is just make sure that when it comes down to working with your coworkers that you've already been working with, make sure that you are sensitive toward the fact that they're also having to accept this adjustment as well, because they have a relationship with you, or they have an understanding of who they thought that you are or that you might be. And they need to be sensitive toward the fact that now with you accepting this new responsibility, that you have to honor that role that you accepted, and that means that you might have to approach them in different ways that might start out as uncomfortable. Likewise, you have to also understand the same thing goes for them. And as their manager, you're more responsible for how they feel about you than how you feel about them. At the end of the day, you're the person with the pen now. Okay, number 2, share your vision with the team. That's something that you can start doing right away, because they're looking for you to have responses to things that are important to them. They know the changes that needed to happen last week and the month before that. They know, and they're waiting to see, just like in politics, they're waiting to see what is it that you're going to do about things that are important for us to have the kind of workplace that we desire, for us to have the kind of sales that we need to have to stay successful. They want to know these things, and you have to share with them, because you need to be transparent with them. Eventually, they're going to need to believe in what you believe, or as much as so, at least to know that they feel comfortable with what you believe, because they're going to need to follow you, and you want their buy-in. That's why it's important to share your vision. You want their buy-in, and you want them to know that you have a plan. They're waiting on your plan. You have to go out of your way to deliver that plan. Make it a priority for you to deliver to them what is your plan. And that's whether you're a new manager or an incoming manager. Your subordinates and all people around you in the professional environment, they need to know what you stand for professionally, what your expectations are, and how do you plan to move them from where they are now to where you want them to be in the future. How do we get there? What's the path? You have to create that path, draw the path in for them. Okay? Distance yourself. So I'm going back to talk about, this is step number 3, by the way. I'm going back to talk about what is necessary relationship-wise for you to thrive as a manager. When it comes to those same old relationships that you've had, or if you're coming into a new company and you're building your relationships, you have to learn how to separate fun from work. It needs to be 2 different things. Not that you're 2 different people. It's just that you're now a professional being. If you haven't been a professional being before, that's also fine. It's part of growing as a professional. and it's part of being what we call managerial. You have to distance yourself from the coworkers that you're normally amongst that are your subordinates now. And we're only speaking in reference to subordinates when I say distance yourself. You want to distance yourself now because we have to learn to rebuild a new relationship. Once you take that promotion and you take on that title, the relationship is going to change. You don't want it to be an uncomfortable change, especially if it's a real friendship. I'm not saying throw away your friendships, but what I'm saying is that this is a step that's going to be necessary for you to add on a new layer to your friendship, which is going to be that managerial hat now that you're wearing. And you're going to have to redefine what your friendship entails now. And that's going to mean that you have to break away from what you were doing before. So the best way to reinvent yourself is to stop doing what you were already doing, take a break from it so that you can evaluate it and then come back with a better plan. This is what step number 3, distance yourself, means. Step away from what you were doing. If you had 3 coworkers that you're normally, partying with or, going to lunch with on a daily and having those intimate conversations about, the issues that you have at work, and now you're moving from a person that has the issues at work to a person that needs to be having a resolve, that can put a resolve in place for not only yourself, but for your team and those people that you had those conversations with. And that means that you with the reinvention of who you are, it's no way around needing to distance yourself from those conversations. You shouldn't have those conversations now, because if so, you're moving in the direction of a manager that's not part of the solution, but you're part of the problem. Because as a manager, you should be available to fix problems, not to create problems or to enhance problems that already exist. You've been empowered to empower, and so you need to try to move in a direction or put yourself around more people now that can help you to generate positive vibes, where those that depend on you now can have you as a rock that maybe yourself that led you to have those conversations with those coworkers maybe didn't have, but you can be that now. So distance yourself, reinvent yourself, and then you can reevaluate the relationships that you have to move forward in a positive direction. Number 4, take the time to develop and redevelop relationships, which I just covered. So 3 and 4, distance yourself first, redevelop the relationships that you've had. Okay, those are, I just covered basically 3 and 4 at one time. Next slide. Escape the idea of managing like family. This is very detrimental to a lot of businesses. It's typical for small businesses. Mid and large size businesses tend to not do this as much, but it's typical way for the majority of organizations, such as businesses with individual sales stores or offices, where there's typically smaller teams. So when there's smaller teams, people tend to build larger bonds. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, it is something wrong with this occurring when management is involved, when the leadership is involved, in a way that it breaks down the role of what managers are expected to have to do. It's very hard to counsel when the person that you need to counsel is like your son, because you take him back and forth to work and you've accepted responsibilities outside of the scope of what a manager should do. It makes it very difficult. So issue number 1, I'm going to stick to the slide. Issue number 1, it hinders the flexibility of a team during times of change. What does that mean? It causes issues when there's transfers. If you work at store number 1 and then they need Sally to go ahead and move over to store number 2, but you guys are cohesive, which is awesome. But if you're cohesive in a family bonded type of way, then Stacy still has to go. She has to go. She's been requested by her, management to go. So she will go. But when she gets there, if she is not being able to be empowered by you to go there and do a great job because she can see the bigger picture, then what she'll do is she'll go over there and not perform to her desired abilities with the intention to hopefully come back to where she felt her family was. And what we need to always be able to do with our subordinates is make sure that they can focus on the task at hand. And the first priority for us as employees is to make sure that we're taking care of business. Because us having a job at the end of the day is the most important thing, and we need to empower each other from there. Promotions, when it comes time to promote those subordinates that work in tight proximity with you, it becomes very difficult, especially if you have some that you relate to like family and some that you don't. Then it becomes a situation that someone might idealize as favoritism, and you don't want that. So it's best to treat everyone the same across the board. Promotions can be a very sticky thing when we do it from within. So that's why you'll see some businesses don't do it from within. I challenge businesses to do it from within more, but according to studies and other scientific measures, the best answer would be to make sure that if you do it from within, that you do it in a very black and white way, meaning that you keep things 100% equal for everyone to have the opportunity to move up. Anything outside of that will seem like favoritism. You don't want that. New hires. If you're already a family-oriented team, as opposed to just being a performance-driven team, then when a new hire comes in, it's almost like they have to play the role of, how do I get in the crew? And you don't want them to have to fight their way to get in the crew, because you want them to be a productive member of your team and not be treated like the outsiders. They're not outsiders. They are a part of the team, and they need to be embraced as such, not having to prove that they are worthy of being a member of your team just because you guys have developed this cohesive bond. This is not the way cohesive bonds are designed to play out in the workplace. And it's not the way that managers should allow their teams to operate. Cross-training. It becomes difficult when it comes down to cross-training, because people don't respect each other on a professional level anymore when they work in the capacity of each other in a family-oriented atmosphere. It's very easy to drop the ball. It's very easy to lose respect for one another professionally. It's very easy for people to not go to different stores and perform to that standard. They'll do a great job if they are in your store working with the right people that they want to work with now that they form these bonds with. But outside of those people, performance tends to decrease. And so that's a reason why cross-training can't happen. If you're working at cell phone store number 1 and Sally's working at cell phone store number 2, and they need to switch roles for the sake of us all having the skill sets that we find necessary, but now Sally can't work with team number 2 because she's so used to working with team number 1 and having that bond that she just cannot adapt to someone doing it a different way. So, and that's a problem. That's where change management starts getting affected by managing like family. And the last one is the ability for one team to work well with the others, which is basically the same thing. Change management it becomes impossible when you start altering the teams and moving people where you need them to be for the common goal of having a successful business instead of the common goal of working only with people that you're most comfortable with. Issue number 2. It makes managing difficult when it comes to counseling your subordinates. It's very hard for you to shelter your subordinates and then turn around at the end of the month and do an end of month review. That's very difficult. If you treat your subordinates like they're your kids instead of like they're responsible adults and employees, then they're not going to respect what you tell them during the counseling, because they're not normally listening to you in that regard, and the respect for your role has been reduced. When you manage like family, the respect for your role will be reduced by the majority of your employees. So don't set yourself up to do that. What you want to do is set yourself up for success, therefore setting your team up for success. You treat them like the responsible adults and professionals that they deserve to be treated like, regardless of what industry that you work in. That's the same that you need to treat all of your subordinates. And they will respect your role and title when it comes down to you coaching and counseling, if you're coaching and counseling the correct way, which we teach at a later time with human triggers. Motivating your subordinates. It's hard to motivate your subordinates when they rely on you to be motivated from a different place. The way you motivate your kids, the way you motivate your friends, the way you motivate others in the community, it's not the same way that you need to motivate your subordinates. It's a professional relationship that you have with them, and when you pull away from that, you cannot go from crying with Susan because her husband has left. It's okay to have some empathy, but you got to watch the sympathy button, because when you go from crying with her about that, it's very hard to get her to turn back on, and snap out of that thing that's happening at home. And that was just an example, but the things that are happening at home, so that she can do what she's expected to do at work. And now that she knows that you have that level of sympathy for her and compassion for her situation, it leaves a loophole to where she's dependent on you in a way that management is not supposed to be dependent on by subordinates. And so I'm not going to say you cannot. I'm going to say it becomes very much more difficult for you to have that higher level of expectation for your subordinates when you make yourself available to take on characteristics of others in their lives as opposed to just being a manager. Playing the role of a leader. The same thing. It makes it very difficult for you to step up and say, hey, my expectations are A in this situation, as opposed to what my expectations were 2 hours ago when we were able to sit down and talk about things that were personal. I had lower expectations of that time. And as we stated earlier, subordinates are looking for you to be consistent. Well, you're not consistent in a situation where you are blending personal with professional in the workplace as a family. So when it comes time to you playing the role of leader, you're in question on whether or not you are a leader because of the different roles that you play. And so the safest thing to do is make sure that the only role you play is that role of a manager. That way you don't deter counseling, motivating your subordinates, and making sure that they respect your role as a leader. Okay, so moving forward, next slide. Dating in the workplace. This is the most controversial of everything that we have in this particular module. But it has to be talked about because we have to set a standard of expectation in your role as it pertains to what relationships are appropriate to have with your subordinates and what relationships are not appropriate to have. The universal rule on dating in the workplace is that it is wrong for a manager to form any type of romantic relationship with a subordinate. Such actions are unethical and can cause severe turbulence in the team or within the organization. This remains true across any business. It is very inappropriate for a manager to decide to fraternize with his subordinates. It breaks down the chemistry that's necessary for two beings in the workplace to be productive when they work on multiple levels. So in the end, it does all the things that we just talked about that causes a manager not to be able to counsel his team, to motivate his team, and to have his team respect his role as a leader. And on top of that, it's just simply a very controversial topic in the workplace. And, when you allow yourself to be open to doing these things in the workplace, you also allow yourself to be open to the drawback that comes with doing such a thing. So next slide. Some of the negative drawbacks, which are listed here: gossip, rumors, or reduced amount of respect from coworkers and subordinates. You're taking away, or you have the ability, the propensity to take away from a workforce that needs to be focused on their goals that you set for them, to be available to now gossip about you in a way that's negative. And that could be one of the biggest outcomes of dating in the workplace, that causes your team to break down, and it also puts your job at jeopardy in a lot of situations, according to what your handbook states. Dating in the workplace is associated with and can lead to favoritism, right? So that takes away from those things that we stated that you have to be able to do as a manager. You have to be able to promote, and when those times come, you have to be able to train to promote. You have to be able to assign tasks and duties to your subordinates and know that they're going to get done, and know that at the end of the day that you're assigning those tasks to them because you have a plan that means that you're looking out for yourself, you're looking out for your subordinates, and more than anything, you're looking out for the needs of the business. And when you have the loophole available, employees are going to walk into it. If you make a way for them to feel like there's favoritism, that's what they're going to do. And we don't want to leave that, as an option for them. So this is why fraternizing can be an issue. Noticeable irrationality within the manager's ability to work with the entire team. It's very hard for you to be dating in the workplace and not give the person that you're dating personal attention that you don't give to the rest of the team. And all of the subordinates will be watching for those things. They're going to zero in on those things. So if you're dating in the workplace, you will be under scope and eye of those that work for you. And they're looking for you to start spending more time with that person, or really any time. It makes it very difficult almost for you to spend any time because, they're looking at it as he's spending more time or any time with that person. It just makes it very skeptical. Subordinates are the best at pointing out your flaws as managers. This is a managerial flaw. So once they point it out, it's going to be a hot topic and it's going to make the workplace uncomfortable. And if you want to have a cohesive team, this is not the way that you do it. And all managers should be striving to have a cohesive team and to know how to motivate those that work for them. And to do that, you need to keep everyone on an even playing field. And romantic gestures in the workplace, of course, that's very well uncomfortable for anyone in the workplace. But to go as far as to court a person in the workplace, God forbid you make it noticeable, then this is just as detrimental to the workplace as having your employees not being led by a manager at all, because it causes that much disruptance in the day-to-day practice. Subordinates also expect managers to treat everyone on the team equally, and this is impossible when there is even a small amount of romantic occurrence in the workplace. So that clears that slide. Next slide. Dating in the workplace, yet again. Okay, so what should happen in the case that, because we're all human and things happen sometimes, and when they happen, we got to know how to deal with them and what's the expectation, therefore, after. What should we do as management if something was to happen where we found ourselves dealing with this type of scrutiny in the workplace? Something has to happen. The manager action, according to this slide, the manager needs to notify senior managers immediately. You just need to come clean. Once you know that you're doing it, the sooner the better. But definitely, once you know that it is occurring, you pretty much need to let senior management know, because you don't want this to be something that you procrastinate on, because it can only cause you problems down the road. Problems for you, it can break down that cohesiveness within your team, that togetherness, that camaraderie that you need on your team to do great things. You don't want to lose your credibility as a manager to something like this. So being the professional that you are, if you do find yourself in this situation, notify senior management so that they can take the necessary steps to make sure to protect you from, putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation and putting the team in that uncomfortable situation. What should senior managers do? Senior managers should transfer the subordinate to a new team or a new department. And if necessary, the manager is going to stay in his particular role. At the end of the day, I guess what this is saying is that you need the separation has to happen. So the subordinate could probably be easily moved on to a similar team in a similar role. This will break the error in relationship. For example, if you're working in store number 1 and there's an opening in store number 2, you started dating Cindy and now you've come clean to senior management, and you're requesting a transfer because of the romantic relationship that you think that you might have with her at some point, hopefully, or that you want to date her and that you guys are seriously considering dating, and you don't want it to be a problem in the workplace, well, then senior management will need to take an immediate action. And that action could be, scenario one would be that they move Cindy over to store number 2 in the same role with a different team. This way, you're no longer her manager. So that way, all these things that we spoke about before, favoritism and rumors and, the reduced amount of respect for your role and title, these things don't happen because you're not in that situation anymore. Okay? Moving on to the next topic, the next slide. We're going to change topics now, so we're leaving that topic alone. Limiting a manager's role to simply being a manager. So this goes back to saying the things that we don't want to do in a managerial role that can break down the credibility of our role. Okay, managers can be everything to everyone. They cannot. You just cannot be everything to everyone. As a manager, especially a new manager, a manager within the first few years of his promotion, his or her promotion, you want to make sure that you don't find yourself doing some of these common roles because it just breaks down everything that you're trying to build up. You're not the parent to your subordinate. Don't be a religious advisor. You're not someone's pastor. Don't be the life coach. Don't find yourself trying to manage things about their life that you should not be managing. Their schedule, for example. You manage their time management skills as it pertains to work. You're not a therapist, so don't try to manage their emotions. Only try to manage their emotions as it pertains to work, not as it pertains to their personal lives and their lives on the 24/7 clock. That's not your job. These are roles that other people in their lives need to play, and not you as their manager. Okay, taking on these roles causes the managers to have, issues in certain areas. Performance management. This is where we make sure that the person is being held accountable to whatever standards of task that we expect for them to complete. Well, you can't do that if, I stated it earlier, if you are relying on them or they're relying on you to be more of a parental guide. It makes it very difficult for you to have that professional relationship that you want to have. Time management, when it comes down to being punctual, and you needing to hold them accountable because you know that Sally doesn't have a car anymore. Well, now Sally has to ride the bus, and unfortunately, sometimes Sally gets to work on the second bus instead of the first bus, and that puts you in a situation are you going to make a way for that to be acceptable, or do you take action? Because it's totally unacceptable, especially when you have a standard for all of your employees. What do you do? How are you going to handle that when there's this expectation for you now, of you rather, because you've been acting as a person's therapist? She's been crying on your shoulder every day, at lunchtime, because you allowed or made room for that. I've never broken down the friendship before, and then that just leaves you in this situation to where now it's very hard for you to counsel her, for even being punctual at work. Team cohesiveness. When it comes down to team cohesiveness, it's very hard for you to have an expectation of your subordinates when you have become a life coach, where there's been an expectation now that's been set for you to take them to the side and make these extra notions that allow them to be trained about their personal lives and expectations in the job. You want to watch out for that. And then production levels. Anytime that there is a standard that is expected to be achieved, but you're dealing and mingling in their personal endeavors, it's just very difficult for you to fade between the two and their expectation of who you need to be, and them having the exception is often taken into consideration as well, which makes it very difficult for you to manage. Okay, next slide. Limiting a manager's role to simply being a manager. So this is the same topic. Things for a manager to remember. It is not a manager's job to take on an employee as a personal project. Stay away from personal projects. in any capacity outside of training to the limits of a subordinate's job, description, or additional tasks as determined by an organizational need. So make sure that you stay away from taking on any other endeavors with the subordinate, as once you take those on, you can't back out of them, and the expectation of you as a manager becomes different than what you need it to be in order for you to be as progressive as you want to be, or it also makes room for you to be considered in the realm of favoritism by other employees, and you want to stay away from that as well. There'll be no time left to manage if the manager is more focused on the employee's personal life instead of work performance. You only have 8 hours on a regular shift. If some guys do overtime in different careers and endeavors, typically there's only 8 hours on the shift. And if you are going to be good at what you need to do as a manager, in order to do that, you need to make the most out of your 8 hours. And in order to make the most out of your 8 hours, you have to make the most out of everyone's 8 hours. So we all have friends. I know that if I talk to one of my friends about something that's devastating going on in their lives, that can take 30 minutes up to 4 hours, maybe even, depending on the situation. So if I stop in the middle of my work day and took that phone call, how long would it take? The same amount of time. So even if you were doing the same thing with the subordinate, it still would take that amount of time. And that infringes on your time management abilities and needs, as well as what they're expected to do, which double infringes on what you need to be doing, because what they need to do impacts what you need them to do, which impacts what you need overall. When these situations present themselves, managers have to be able to decline the invitation. Additional roles can lead to overstepping managerial boundaries. Okay, moving on, next slide. Accepting the responsibility of counseling employees. Members of management are not only responsible for being motivators and mentors, they are also responsible for counseling. This is the ugly part of management that as a new manager you may have not done before, that if you don't learn to separate your personal endeavors with your team that you're now leading, when this time comes around, whether it's quarterly, whether it's hopefully monthly at the worst case scenario, but when it comes around to these times, if you haven't managed to gain that respect level, it makes it very difficult for the subordinate's ear to be open to what you're talking about and to make the necessary changes that you're dependent on them to make in order to do their job. They are also responsible for disciplinary tasks and being accountable to support the needs of the business as a first priority. So, in other words, the business is your first priority. It's everyone's first priority. It's definitely your first priority. And so that personal relationship shouldn't be your first priority when you step into the role of a manager, because that's part of what you're accepting to do, is to make that business the first thing that you find important when it comes down to work. Okay, managers must be strong enough to take action when disciplinary action is required. It's necessary. It's nowhere around it. This is the ugly part of being, in charge of someone. Those hard decisions have to be made, and they have to be made at the discretion of what's best for the business. So postponing actions such as written warnings, suspensions, and terminations, these are things that will eventually need to be dealt with. You can't run from them, and then they also affect your performance. So the sooner that you can get in line with the idea that this is something that you're going to have to deal with and manage to, the better. So this is just us giving you exposure to the idea, because it's definitely coming. I'm sure most of you have already dealt with that. This hurts the manager, the employee, and the company. When you cannot counsel your employees to standard or at all for that case, or you just flat out don't, maybe there's not a system in place, and so it's just not done. You really hurt everyone. Sales depend on counseling. Customer service depends on counseling. Everyone being able to progress in their roles and in the company depends on having those counselings available, so that we can determine merit, so that we can determine positive things about a person's work abilities, as well as areas of improvement. But if we're not counseling, then even the things that are good about a counseling, we can't verify or clarify. So don't not do counseling based on, you not knowing how based on you accepting a new role, because everyone depends on it, not only for growth in things that we don't do well, but for growth in things that we do well. Everything relies on performance management when it comes down to who's getting promoted, and when it comes down to who needs to be let go, and when it comes down to us identifying areas of improvement for the entire team and personally. Okay, next slide. Not accepting the responsibility of counseling employees affects everyone. So let's look at that a little bit more. We said it in the last slide that it affects the subordinate, the manager, and the company overall. So how does it affect the subordinate? The written warning lets the employee know that something is officially wrong. So if they have never been told that something's wrong, they really have no clue that something is in fact wrong. It's the manager's job to let them know that something has gone wrong and that something needs to be changed. But first let them know that something needs to be changed. We got to first let them know that something's wrong. It's letting them know that changes is required to maintain their image as a model employee. So this is basically letting them know how you feel about them based on their actions. We have to let them know. We can't have them to continue to move on as an employee and live in denial about what's going on. But technically it's not denial. It's they haven't been pushed into a situation to have to accept, what is going on. So if I'm late every day, and I've been late every day for the last 3 months, but my manager hasn't told me that it's important, it's not important. It's not important until I'm told that it's important. That's the mind frame of a subordinate. And we've all been there. But in order to have your subordinates to know what is necessary, your followers, your employees to know what's necessary, we have to make sure that we let them know. And if they don't know, then they're detrimental to themselves and to the team. The longer it takes a manager to take action is simply the longer it will take for the employee to correct the action. Remember that. Okay. How does this affect the manager? Avoiding disciplinary action as a manager hinders personal growth in regards to being an effective communicator. You're probably avoiding taking corrective action because you feel that you're not a very effective communicator, or it's definitely out of fear. Usually it's out of fear. Either it's out of fear or it's out of lack of guidance from senior management. But as a manager, if you have those issues and you, based on this learning, you know that these standards are not available, then you should be notifying senior management so that they can take the necessary steps to get it available. So the only thing other than that would be fear of communicating. And the only way we can get better at doing some things is that we just start doing them. You can't get better at effective communicating without training, first of all, and without action. Okay, once you know better, do better. You heard that statement probably before. But we have to come out of our shell to start doing the things that we don't know how to do. So don't manage in fear. Come out of that fear and do your job. Part of your job is these counselings. It's necessary for their subordinates' growth and then personally for your growth. Managers have the responsibility to develop others, and sometimes that comes in the form of negative counseling. It's a part of the job. And if you think about it as a negative counseling, then that makes it, that takes away the value of what's actually going on. If you let someone know what they're doing incorrect or what they're doing below standard and show them how to do it to standard, then that's not a negative counseling. That's very empowering for them to know, because they now know what to do to make the corrections to make themselves better. And we all want to be better at our jobs. We need the opportunity to be better. And that's why managers need to be effective communicators, and they also need to make sure that they don't avoid doing things that they're scared of doing, because you're robbing yourself from being better at that talent, and then also, or from having that talent, and then also you're robbing your subordinates because they're not being forced to get better, and they're not being given the opportunity to do what's necessary to be as good of an employee as they could be if they were challenged. Okay, how does this affect the company overall? Obviously, profit loss. This all ends in profit loss. A decline in customer service, right? Reduced productivity. All managers in an organization are responsible for counseling their employees, and not doing so, it just leads to all of those things. I'll say them again: reduced productivity, a decline in customer service, and profit loss. These are all things that at the very end of the day will occur from not coaching and counseling your team. The welfare of the individual can never come before that of the organization. So When it comes down to us being a parent to our subordinates or being the pastor to our subordinates, it puts us in that place of where we have to start making these hard decisions of what really is important. And we shouldn't, as managers, have to make those decisions. Those decisions are made for us when we accept the title of leader/manager. We decided on what role we want to play in that person's life. And if we don't, then what we do is we affect the business at the end of the day, which we stepped up and took a vow as a leader and a manager to the business and said we're going to make the business the number one priority in all things that we do in reference to what we do professionally, at least in this particular work endeavor. Okay? So that pretty much concludes step 1, which is managerial essentials. Thanks.